You won't believe what happened to me, seriously. There are times when life seems like a poorly written comedy, and me, well, I'm the protagonist who didn't ask for the part. There I was, with my grey hair that I've worn with pride for years, in line at the bank on a Thursday that seemed normal. Seemed, that's the point. Because normal is what that day definitely was not. You know that feeling that something is going to go wrong? I never had that. I was always one of those annoying optimists, you know? The kind who wakes up thinking, the day is going to be wonderful, even when it's raining cats and dogs. 55 years believing things always work out. Ah, how wrong I was. The bank line was slower than molasses in January. 15 people in front of me, only 2 tellers working, and an air conditioner that felt like the Arctic. A classic test of anyone's patience. I was there to sort out a simple retirement. My retirement, mind you, after 35 years dedicated to the teaching profession. 35 years teaching ungrateful teenagers that math wasn't invented just to torture them. 35 years grading papers until late at night. 35 years putting up with parents who thought their kids were the 8th wonder of the world, and that if they got a low grade, it could only be my fault. And now, finally, freedom awaited me, or at least that's what I thought. When it was finally my turn, after what felt like an eternity filled with people loudly complaining and kids running around like they were on a track field, I was attended by a young man who barely looked up from his computer. "Name?" he asked with as much enthusiasm as a door. I answered, of course, I answered with that smile I learned to maintain even with the most problematic students. "ID," he continued, still not looking at me. I handed him my driver's license, my social security card, and all the papers that proved that I, Mary Johnson, had served my time in the educational system and finally deserved to enjoy my long-awaited retirement. That's when the horror show began. "Ma'am, your application was not approved." 5 words, 5 simple words that sent my world collapsing faster than a house of cards. "What do you mean it wasn't approved?" I asked, still trying to keep smiling, even though I felt it starting to freeze on my face. "System didn't recognize your last 5 years of contributions. You need to file an appeal." And he said it like someone commenting on the weather, as if he wasn't talking about 5 years of my life that had apparently disappeared from the system. Breathe, Mary Johnson. Breathe and remember that assaulting a public servant is a crime. But I have the proof here, all of it, organized by month even. I opened my folder, that blue folder I've carried like a third hand for months, and showed him the perfectly organized documents, with colored labels and everything. He didn't even look. "Ma'am, the problem isn't the physical proof. The system didn't recognize it. You need to file an appeal." And he kept typing something that, apparently, was much more important than my life falling apart right there, in front of him. That's when something inside me just broke. That patient Mary Johnson, who smiled even when she wanted to scream, who always followed the rules, who never, ever raised her voice in public. She simply went on vacation. In her place, a woman I didn't know appeared. One who slammed her hand on the counter, hard enough to make the young man finally look me in the eyes. "Listen here, young man, I didn't spend 35 years of my life putting up with rude teenagers to now be treated like an idiot by someone who probably didn't even know how to multiply when I was already graduating generations. I have all the proof right here. I followed all the rules, I filled out all the forms, even the ones that asked the same thing 5 different ways. And now you're telling me the system didn't recognize it?" The line behind me fell silent. One of those awkward silences, you know, where you can hear even the hum of the fluorescent lights. The young man blinked a few times, clearly not used to seeing an older woman with grey hair raising her voice like that. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but no, you don't understand. You have no idea what it's like to work for over 3 decades, dreaming of the day you can finally rest only to be told that the system didn't recognize it. The system isn't some mystical entity. Someone typed something wrong, someone didn't do their job correctly." At that moment, I realized I had attracted an audience. The people in line were no longer complaining about the wait. They were watching the show starring a retired teacher who was 5 feet 3 inches tall. Some had even taken out their phones to film. Great. Now I'd be the next internet viral video. Gray-haired lady snaps at bank. What pride for my former students. A security guard approached. One of those big guys who look more like closet men than people. "Any problem here?" he asked, looking directly at me as if I was the threat. Me, with my £130 and my purse full of documents. "The problem," I replied, already feeling I had gone too far to back down, "is that apparently my 5 years of contributions disappeared into the ether, and nobody here seems to think that's absurd, except me." The security guard exchanged a look with the teller, one of those looks men exchange when they think they're dealing with a hysterical woman, and then said in a voice he probably thought was calming, "Ma'am, why don't you come with me to the manager's office to resolve this calmly?" Calmly. I had been calm for the past 35 years. Calm while watching the educational system crumble. Calm while receiving salaries that barely covered the basics. Calm while politicians promised to value education and never delivered. And now, when it was finally time to reap the fruits of so much work, I should remain calm. But I followed the closet man to the manager's office, not without giving a final look at the teller who remained impassive. The manager was a middle-aged woman with a smile as rehearsed as a game show host's. She invited me to sit with a fake cordiality that only worsened my mood. "Ms. Johnson, I completely understand your frustration. I bet you do. I bet you also had 5 years of your professional life simply erased by a system error. But I need you to understand that we, here at the branch, simply follow the protocols determined by headquarters. If the system didn't recognize your contributions, we need to follow the standard procedure, which is the administrative appeal." I took a deep breath, so deep I thought I'd suck all the air out of the room. "And how long does this administrative appeal take?" Her smile wavered slightly. Bad sign. "On average, 3 to 6 months for the initial review." 6 months? I could feel my blood pressure rising faster than a rocket. "And if the initial review is negative, then you can file a secondary appeal, which takes another." She consulted something on her computer. 4 to 8 months. At that moment, I laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when the situation is so absurd that your brain simply doesn't know how to react anymore. "So let me see if I understand. I worked for 35 years. I have all the proof, all the documents. I followed all the rules. And now, because of an error that I did not commit, I might have to wait up to 14 months to receive what is rightfully mine." The manager maintained her smile, but her eyes conveyed that universal message of, "Please don't make a scene in my branch." "Unfortunately, Ms. Johnson, that is the procedure." That's when I decided that procedure was my new least favorite word in the dictionary, easily surpassing pop quiz and parent-teacher meeting. "And what if I don't accept this?" "Procedure?" The manager blinked, confused. Clearly, she wasn't used to gray-haired ladies who didn't accept bureaucracy as a force of nature, immutable and inevitable. "What do you mean, not accept?" Exactly what I said. What if I refuse to wait 14 months for something that is rightfully mine? What if I decide this is unacceptable and I'm going to fight against it? She gave me that condescending smile that made me want to throw the pen holder at the wall. "Ms. Johnson, I understand your frustration, but there's not much you can do besides follow the procedure." I stood up slowly, gathered my documents, and stared at the manager for a few seconds before saying, "We'll see." And so my war began. A war I never imagined fighting at 65 years old, when I should have been traveling to the beach or learning to crochet. Although, let's be honest, I never had the patience for crochet. First, I did what any sensible person would do. I tried to resolve it through official channels. I called the Social Security toll-free number. Once, twice, 50 times. Most of the time I was left listening to that annoying hold music for hours, only for the call to eventually drop. When I finally managed to speak to a representative, the answer was the same. "You need to file an administrative appeal, ma'am." I tried the website. Oh, the website. A masterpiece of digital confusion. Buttons that don't work, forms that disappear when you're about to submit them, and language so obscure it seemed written for aliens, not ordinary citizens. After 2 weeks trying the official channels, I realized I was wasting time. The bureaucracy wasn't just inefficient. It was intentionally labyrinthine to discourage people like me. People who don't have 14 months to wait. People who work their whole lives following the rules, only to find out the rules weren't made to protect them. That's when I decided to change tactics. If the system didn't work for me, I would have to make it work. And for that, I would need allies. My first stop was the teachers' union. I imagined I would find solidarity, support, maybe even legal guidance. What I found was more bureaucracy. Fill out this form, wait to be called, maybe we can schedule a meeting in a few weeks. A few weeks? I was already boiling with impatience after 2. It was in the union waiting room while waiting for my number to be called, 123, I was 87, that I met Susan. Her hair was even grayer than mine. She wore red-rimmed glasses, and her expression blended weariness and determination. She was flipping through a magazine from 2018, probably the most recent one available in that dimly lit room. Trying to sort out retirement too? I asked, more to pass the time than out of real interest. She looked up from the magazine and assessed me for a few seconds before answering, "No, I gave up that battle 2 years ago. Now I'm here out of pure stubbornness." Something in that answer lit a spark in me. "What do you mean you gave up?" Susan closed the magazine and adjusted herself in her chair to tell me her story. And what a story. She had worked for 40 years, 40, as a geography teacher. When it was time to retire, she discovered there was an inconsistency in her records. According to the system, she had worked in 2 schools simultaneously for 3 years, something physically impossible as the schools were in different towns. "But I have all the proof," she said, in a tone that sounded painfully familiar. "I even have statements from the principals, but the system says it's impossible, so it must be, right?" The sarcasm in her voice was so sharp it could cut paper. "And what are you doing here if you gave up?" I asked, genuinely curious. Susan smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knows uncomfortable truths. "I'm helping other teachers not to fall into the same trap I did. I started a support group. We meet every Wednesday in the town square. A support group for teachers with social security problems? That seemed both sad and comforting. How many of you are there?" "We started with 5. Now there are 28. I swallowed hard. 28 women all facing the same problem? This wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. "And do you get results?" Susan's smile turned into something more genuine. "Alone, we're just frustrated old ladies. Together, we're a nightmare for bureaucracy." At that moment, I was certain my number wouldn't be called that day. Instead of waiting, I asked Susan for more information about her group. She gave me a surprisingly well-made card. RWB, Retired Women Against Bureaucracy. On the back, an email address and the location of the next meeting. I left the union feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not that naive hope of someone who believes everything will work out just because, but the calculated hope of someone who sees a path to fight. The first RWB meeting was a revelation. It wasn't just a support group, it was a task force. Each of the women had a specific skill. Susan, the informal leader, was an expert in navigating bureaucracy. Carol, a former computer teacher, understood online systems better than many young people. Barbara, who taught law before becoming a high school teacher, knew all the legal loopholes. And there were others. Patricia, who always carried a notebook and wrote everything down in impeccable handwriting. Linda, who had a gift for making even the most insensitive bureaucrat feel guilty with just a look. Margaret, whose son was a journalist and occasionally published articles about particularly absurd cases. They were ordinary women who, together, formed an unlikely army against the bureaucratic machine. And now, I was one of them. In the following weeks, I learned more about social security rights than in my entire life. I learned how to navigate government websites, identify the right people to pressure, and draft letters that sounded legal, enough to be taken seriously. Meanwhile, I continued with my own case. I filed the administrative appeal as recommended, but I didn't just wait. Following Barbara's advice, I also contacted the Public Defender's Office, Legal Aid. The line was miles long, of course, but at least I was acting on 2 fronts. Carol helped me discover that my problem wasn't unique. There were dozens of teachers, mostly women, facing the exact same issue. Years of contributions that simply disappeared from the system when it was time to retire. "It's almost like it's intentional," Carol commented as she showed me the patterns she had identified. "It happens mostly with teachers who worked in more than one school or town throughout their careers. Like me, who had taught in 3 different towns during my 35 years in the teaching profession. The revelation made me even more indignant. It wasn't just a random system error. It seemed to be a systematic failure affecting a specific group of professionals. After 2 months of fighting, I had my first victory. Small but significant. Through a lot of persistence and some veiled threats of media exposure, thank you, Margaret, I managed to secure a meeting with the regional Social Security Office manager. His office was exactly as I had imagined. Impersonal, cold, with those artificial plants that collect dust and framed photographs of handshakes with politicians. The man behind the desk, Dr. Robert, as he insisted on being called, had that permanent expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Ms. Johnson," he began, without standing up to greet me, "I've conducted a preliminary review of your case." Preliminary. Another word for my blacklist. And I've concluded that indeed there is an inconsistency in the system. Inconsistency added to the list. "However," he continued, and I already knew a bomb was coming, "the standard procedure for these cases is still the administrative appeal, which you have already initiated." I took a deep breath, counted to 10 mentally, a technique I learned from Linda not to jump at bureaucrats' throats, and replied with a calmness I didn't feel. "Dr. Mai, Robert, we are facing a system error that affects not only me but dozens of teachers. Teachers who dedicated their lives to the education of this country. I sincerely hope standard procedure is not your final answer." He seemed slightly surprised by my response. Clearly, he was used to people who accepted bureaucracy without question. "And what answer would you expect then?" That was a good one. He was actually asking me what I expected from him, as if I were responsible for solving the problem they created. I would expect, at the very least, a temporary solution, while the appeal is pending. After all, that's months, potentially over a year, without receiving what is rightfully mine. Months when bills will keep coming, when I'll need to eat, when life doesn't stop just because the system had an inconsistency. Dr. Robert shuffled some papers on his desk, visibly uncomfortable. "Unfortunately, there is no provision for temporary payments in cases like this." I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I had come prepared for that answer. It's interesting you mention that, because according to Regulation 128 of 2022, Section 47-3, in cases of evident administrative error in the analysis of contribution data, provisional payment may be authorized until the final resolution of the case. His eyes widened slightly. Clearly, he didn't expect a gray-haired lady to quote regulations from memory. "Well, yes, technically that provision exists, but... and considering that you yourself just admitted there is a system inconsistency and that I possess all the physical proof of my contributions, it seems to me that we are unequivocally facing an evident administrative error. Wouldn't you agree?" Dr. Robert adjusted his tie as if it had suddenly become too tight. "Ms. Johnson, I see you came well prepared for this meeting. 35 years teaching teenagers to prepare for life, Doctor. It would be ironic if I didn't follow that advice myself." He pursed his lips, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I will review your case more carefully." "I appreciate that. And while you review, I'd like to leave these articles with your secretary. They will be published next week." I handed him an envelope that, in reality, contained only drafts of potential articles that Margaret's son could write. A bluff, I admit, but a calculated one. Articles. His discomfort noticeably increased. Yes, about a curious pattern of inconsistencies that specifically affect teachers at retirement age. Curious, don't you think? I left that meeting without a definitive solution, but with the certainty that I had planted a seed of concern. And concern, as Susan taught me well, is often the first step towards action in the bureaucratic world. At the next RWB meeting, I shared my experience. The approval in Susan's eyes was worth every minute of preparation. "You learned fast," she commented. "It took me 6 months to get to the point of quoting regulations." I smiled, genuinely proud. I had good teachers. It was Carol who brought the big revelation the following week. After analyzing more cases similar to mine, she identified an even more specific pattern. "It's not just teachers who worked in different locations," she explained, showing an impressively detailed spreadsheet. "It's teachers who worked in schools that were transferred to municipal or state control during their careers. Like my second school. which was under state control when I started working there and was transferred to municipal control 5 years later. Exactly the 5 years that disappeared from the system. The system was updated after these transitions, Carol continued. But apparently the contribution data from before the change wasn't migrated correctly. So it's not incompetence, Susan concluded. It's structural negligence. Her words echoed in the room. Structural negligence. That was exactly what we were facing. It wasn't just an isolated error, it was a systemic failure that someone, at some point, decided wasn't worth fixing. Armed with this information, we decided to change tactics. It wasn't enough to fight case by case anymore. We needed to expose the problem in its entirety. Margaret finally convinced her son to write not just a note, but a full report. Carol compiled all the data we had, creating an impressive statistical analysis that showed, without a doubt, the pattern of failures. Patricia, with her impeccable handwriting, drafted letters to all the state representatives. Linda organized a protest. Yes, a protest of grey-haired ladies in front of the regional Social Security office. And me? Well, I became the face of the campaign. The dedicated teacher who, after 35 years of service, was forced to fight for what was already rightfully hers. I gave interviews, spoke on local radio, participated in debates. It was strange. I, who had always been reserved, who preferred the anonymity of the classroom, was now exposed, public, visible. But every time I hesitated, I remembered the other 27 women who depended on this fight as much as I did. The pressure began to have an effect after 3 months of intensive campaigning. First, I received a call from Dr. Roberts' office inviting me to a new meeting. This time I didn't go alone. I took Susan and Barbara with me. Dr. Roberts' demeanor was completely different. The discomfort had given way to something that seemed almost respect. He stood up when we entered, a gesture he hadn't made the first time, and invited us to sit with a cordiality that seemed genuine. "Ms. Johnson, I have reviewed your case more carefully as I promised." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Years of dealing with parents who thought their children were never wrong had given me that skill. And I discovered that, indeed, there was a systemic error in the data migration after the school where you worked was transferred to municipal control. Again, that urge to say, "I told you so," but I restrained myself. Considering this, and supported by the regulation that you know so well, he gave a look that mixed annoyance and admiration, "I have authorized the provisional payment of your benefits while the case is definitively resolved." Victory! I wanted to scream, jump, maybe even hug Susan and Barbara, but again I restrained myself. This wasn't just about me. And what about the other 27 teachers in the same situation? Some who have been waiting for years? His expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Johnson, I am specifically addressing your case right now." Susan intervened, her voice calm but firm. "Dr. Robert, you yourself admitted that this is a systemic error. Elementary logic would say that if it affects one teacher in this condition, it affects all others in the same situation. Unfortunately, each case needs to be reviewed individually." It was Barbara's turn to speak. "Section 50 of the Administrative Procedure Act, Doctor. The administration must adopt simple and sufficient forms to provide an adequate degree of certainty, security, and respect for the rights of those administered. Reviewing 28 identical cases individually would be the opposite of simple and sufficient forms. Wouldn't you agree?" The silence that followed was almost palpable. Dr. Robert looked from one to the other, clearly surprised by the level of legal preparation of 3 ladies who he probably expected to be easily dismissed. Finally, he let out a resigned sigh. "I will forward a recommendation for a mass review of similar cases." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a promising start. The news spread quickly among the other RWB members. Provisional payments began to be authorized for more cases, although not yet for all. The process was slow, but at least there was movement. The report written by Margaret's son gained national traction. Other cities began reporting similar problems. What started as a fight by 28 teachers in a medium-sized town in the countryside transformed into a movement that encompassed hundreds of educators across the country. 6 months after my initial visit to the bank where it all began, I received a call that would change everything. It was from Washington, D.C., from the office of a federal representative, trans congresswoman who had read about our case. Ms. Johnson, this is from Congresswoman Sarah Miller's office. The Congresswoman would like to invite you to a public hearing on systemic failures in teacher Social Security. Would it be possible for you to come to Washington, D.C. next week? Washington, D.C.? Me in Washington, D.C.? Speaking at a public hearing? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Not just me, I replied without hesitation. We are 28 women fighting together. I believe it would be important for some of us to be present. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I understand. Let me check if we can get authorization for more. How many would be willing to go? I did a quick mental count. Some of the RWB members had health issues that would make travel difficult. Others had family commitments. I believe at least 5 of us. 5. Okay, I'll check and get back to you. In the end, we got authorization for 3, me, Susan, and Carol. The choice was difficult but logical. I as the public face of the campaign, Susan as the group's founder, and Carol with all the data and statistics that supported our case. The trip to Washington, D.C. was an adventure in itself. None of us had been to the capital before. The taxi. From the airport to the hotel itself, modest but clean. The monumental buildings, everything seemed out of another world. The night before the hearing, none of us slept well. We went over our arguments, practiced answers to potential questions, reviewed data. It was as if we were preparing for the most important test of our lives, which, in a way, it was. The House of Representatives was imposing, with all its architectural and bureaucratic grandeur. After passing through metal detectors and receiving visitor badges, we were guided to the room where the hearing would take place. To our surprise, the room was already partially full. Representatives from Social Security, politicians, journalists, and, to my delight, other teachers from different states, all facing problems similar to ours. Congresswoman Sarah met us personally. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her 40s, with an energy that contrasted with the generally lethargic atmosphere of Congress. "Ladies, it is an honor to welcome you," she said, shaking our hands with genuine enthusiasm. "What you have managed to do, mobilizing yourselves without resources, just with determination, is inspiring." Her words warmed me, but also reminded me of the absurdity of the situation. We were being praised for fighting for what should already be rightfully ours, for correcting an error that should never have existed. The hearing formally began, with the Congresswoman explaining the purpose, to discuss systemic failures in Social Security that specifically affected teachers, focusing on the specific problem of lost data after schools were transferred to municipal or state control. The Social Security representatives spoke first. As expected, they used technical and distant language talking about challenges in data migration and systemic limitations inherited from previous administrations. It was bureaucracy in its purest form, turning real errors that affected real lives into impersonal abstractions. When it was our turn, Susan began with a brief history of our group. Carol presented the data, impressively organized into charts that clearly showed the pattern of failures. And then it was my turn. I stood up, adjusted my glasses, and looked at the room full of people whose decisions would affect not only me, but thousands of teachers in similar situations. My name is Mary Johnson. I worked for 35 years as a math teacher. I taught generations of students, some of whom are now doctors, engineers, lawyers. Some may even work here, in Congress. I paused, letting my words sink in. For 35 years, I followed all the rules. I paid all my contributions, I filled out all the forms, I met all the deadlines, I did everything I was asked. Another pause. The room was completely silent. And when it was time to receive what was rightfully mine, not a favor, not a concession, but a right, I discovered that 5 years of my contributions had simply disappeared from the system. My voice began to tremble slightly, not from nervousness, but from an indignation that even after months still burned like fire. I was told to wait, to file appeals, to accept that, because of an error that I did not commit, I could spend up to 14 months over a year of my life without receiving what I worked decades to earn. I looked directly at the Social Security representatives, and it's Not just me. There are 28 of us in our town, hundreds across the country. Teachers, mostly women, mind you, who dedicated their lives to this country's education and who now, when it's time to rest, are treated as if they are inconvenient, as if our years of service are worth less than the systemic limitation you mentioned. The room remained silent. Some of the representatives present seemed genuinely moved. Others, more cynical, were discreetly checking their phones. The social. Security representatives maintained neutral expressions, trained by years of similar hearings. We are not asking for favors. We are demanding justice. We are demanding respect. We are demanding that the system, created to serve us, not the other way around, function as it should. I finished my speech and sat back down, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Had I said everything that needed to be said? Had I been clear enough? Had I conveyed the urgency, the injustice, the need for immediate action? The questions that followed indicated that I had. Representatives from different political parties, some who you would never imagine agreeing with each other, expressed support for our cause. Congresswoman Sarah proposed the creation of a specific working group to resolve the problem at a national level. The Social Security representatives, under pressure, committed to implementing a task force to review similar cases and expedite provisional payments while the processes were definitively analyzed. At the end of the hearing, Susan, Carol, and I looked at each other, a little incredulous at the outcome. Had we really done it? Had we moved the giant bureaucratic machine? The next day before heading home, we received a call from Congresswoman Sarah. She wanted to meet us for coffee before our departure. At the coffee shop, she was direct. "Ladies, what you did is extraordinary. You managed to bring attention to a problem that affects thousands of people, and now we have a public commitment to solve it." We thanked her, of course, but I still had a question. And how long until we see concrete results? The Congresswoman smiled. Not a political smile, but a genuine one. The task force started working yesterday, right after the hearing. The first provisional payments for cases like yours should begin in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, not 14. Months, not 6 months, but 2 weeks. And most importantly, she continued, you have created a precedent. You showed that it is possible to fight bureaucracy and win, that gray-haired ladies are not invisible, are not disposable, are not easy to fool or dismiss. Susan, always the most reserved of us, had tears in her eyes. Carol, usually focused on data and facts, was smiling openly. And me? I felt a mix of emotions difficult to describe. Relief, of course, pride, no doubt, but also a twinge of sadness that so much effort had been necessary to achieve what should have been automatic. We returned home as heroes. The other RWB members welcomed us at the airport with flowers and signs. The local press was there. It was surreal. In the following weeks, as promised, the provisional payments began to be released, first for the 28 in our town, then for similar cases across the country. The task force was truly working. 1 year after my initial visit to the bank where it all began, I received the official notification. My case had been definitively resolved. The 5 lost years had been officially recognized. My retirement was regularized, but something had changed in me. I couldn't simply go back to the life I had planned before all this, not after seeing how many people faced similar problems, not after realizing the power we had when we united. The RWB, Retired Women Against Bureaucracy, didn't end with the resolution of our cases. On the contrary, it expanded. We started helping teachers with other social security problems, then other public servants. Our accumulated knowledge, our experience fighting, became a valuable resource. Today, 3 years later, the RWB is a nationally recognized organization. We have chapters in 12 states. We offer free consultation to retirees facing bureaucratic problems. We regularly participate in public hearings. We are invited to give lectures on social security rights. And me? Well, I never imagined that at 68 years old, I would be more active than in my entire professional life. I never imagined that my gray hair, instead of making me invisible as society often does with older women, would become a symbol of resistance. Sometimes when I visit the bank where it all began, I cross paths with that first teller, the young man who barely looked up at me. He recognizes me now. Everyone recognizes me. I'm no longer just Mary Johnson, the retired teacher. I'm Mary Johnson, the woman who refused to be ignored. The woman who, along with 27 other grey-haired warriors, showed that age comes with wisdom, with strength, and sometimes with a justified indignation that can move mountains. Or, in our case, that can make bureaucracy work as it should. And to all of you listening to me now, remember, it's never too late to fight. It's never too late to say, no, this isn't right, or no, I'm not just going to accept this. Because in the end, change doesn't come from great heroes or distant leaders. It comes from ordinary people who decide they have had enough. People like me, like Susan, like Carol, people like you. So the next time someone looks at you and sees just an old lady, remember, behind those wrinkles and grey hair lies a warrior. And warriors, my dear, never retire.